At my granddaughter's birthday party, my phone buzzed under the table. Unknown number. 4 words. Don't eat the cake. I looked up. My daughter was already cutting the first slice, smiling at me. I smiled back. I turned 68 last March, and I still drive myself to the grocery store, manage my own checkbook, and do the crossword in pen. I mention this because it matters later. My name is Vivian. I live in the same house in Asheville, North Carolina, where my late husband Gerald and I raised our 2 children. Gerald passed 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One morning, he was drinking his coffee at the kitchen table, and by noon he was gone. That kind of loss doesn't leave you. You just learn to carry it differently. After he died, my daughter Diane and her husband Craig started calling more, visiting more. I appreciated it at first. Grief is a strange thing. It makes you grateful for any warmth that comes your way, and you don't always stop to ask why it's coming. Diane is 51 years old. She works in real estate. Craig manages a car dealership in Hendersonville. They have 2 kids, my grandson Nolan, who is 15, and my granddaughter Lily, who just turned 11. I love those children more than I can put into words. What I didn't know for a long time was that Diane and Craig had been talking about my house. Our house, Gerald's and mine, is paid off. We bought it in 1987 for $94,000. A financial advisor told me last year it's worth somewhere around $580,000 now. The neighborhood changed, the city grew, and suddenly the house Gerald and I scrimped and saved to buy became something other people saw as an asset. I just saw it as home. I also have Gerald's pension, my own retirement savings from 31 years teaching middle school English, and a life insurance payout that I've kept mostly untouched. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. More importantly, I'm independent. I worked my entire life to make sure I would never have to ask my children for anything. That, as it turned out, was the problem. It started small, the way these things always do. Diane began mentioning very gently that the house was a lot to manage alone. She'd come over and point out things, a loose gutter, a creaky step on the back porch, the fact that I was all the way up here when they were down in Hendersonville. She said it with concern in her voice. She always said it with concern. Then she started bringing up a place called Sycamore Ridge. It's a senior living community on the east side of Asheville, the kind with a dining hall and organized activities and a chapel to the doctor's office. She showed me the brochure. Very nice, she said. Independent living. You'd have your own apartment and you'd never have to worry about the house again. I told her I didn't worry about the house. The house was fine. I was fine. She dropped it. Then she brought it up again 3 weeks later. I noticed the pattern, but told myself she was just being a caring daughter. That's what you do when you love someone. You explain away the things that make you uneasy. Craig started joining these conversations. He'd bring up numbers, maintenance costs, property taxes, what it costs to age in place. He spoke to me the way people speak to someone who doesn't understand money, slow and deliberate, as if my years of managing a household budget, paying off a mortgage, and raising 2 children on a teacher's salary counted for nothing now that I was on the other side of 65. I nodded along. I kept my thoughts to myself. Then came Lily's birthday party. It was a Saturday in October. Diane had organized everything at their house. Streamers, a balloon arch, one of those elaborate smash cakes that are more decoration than food. Nolan was there, helping his sister open gifts with the particular impatience of a 15-year-old who would rather be anywhere else but was trying his best. I watched him and felt a wave of love so strong it almost embarrassed me. We were all seated around the big dining room table when my phone buzzed in my cardigan pocket. I assumed it was my friend Ruth Ann. We text each other pictures of birds we spot in the yard, which I realize sounds exactly as old ladyish as it is, and I'm not sorry. But when I looked down, it wasn't Ruth Ann's name. It was an unknown number. And the message said, "Don't eat the cake. I'll explain later. Please act normal. I read it twice, then I put my phone back in my pocket. Diane was standing at the head of the table with a knife, asking Lily which piece she wanted. I smiled. I clapped along with everyone when Lily blew out her candles. When Diane set a slice of birthday cake in front of me, I picked up my fork, cut a small piece, and moved it around my plate. I do not know how I kept my face steady. I only know that I did. After the party, when everyone was helping clear dishes, I slipped out to the back porch. I typed back to the unknown number, "Who is this?" The response came immediately, "It's Nolan." I used Dad's old phone so they wouldn't know. "Grandma, I need to talk to you. Not here. Can you call me tomorrow?" I stood there on that porch in the October cold and looked through the glass door at my family moving around in the kitchen. Diane laughing at something Craig said. Lily still wearing her paper birthday crown. Craig refilling his glass of sweet tea. I typed back, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I love you." He said back a single heart emoji. That was enough. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed, the same bed Gerald and I shared for 33 years, and stared at the ceiling and tried to make my mind slow down. I thought about the cake. I thought about Nolan and the old phone and the word please in his message. 15-year-old boys don't say please unless something has frightened them. At 10 the next morning he called. He talked for 20 minutes, and I didn't interrupt once. He said it started with a conversation he overheard 3 months ago. Diane and Craig didn't know he was in the hallway. They were in the kitchen talking in the low voices people use when they want to be quiet but are too worked up to actually manage it. He heard Craig say, "The doctor just needs to document it. One evaluation, that's all we need." Diane said, "She's going to push back. You know how she is." Craig said, "It doesn't matter. Once it's on paper, we petition the court. The house goes into the estate. We're named trustees and we handle everything from there. It's clean." Nolan said he didn't fully understand what he'd heard, so he looked things up. Guardianship, conservatorship. He was 15 years old, and he stayed up past midnight reading legal websites, trying to figure out what his parents were planning to do to his grandmother. He found out about Dr. Harlan Weeks. He didn't know how Diane and Craig had connected with him, only that his mother had mentioned the name on a phone call, and that when he searched for the doctor, he found the practice, and then, on a legal forum, a post from someone in Tennessee describing almost exactly what Nolan had overheard. An evaluation structured to conclude cognitive decline, documentation that could be used to initiate guardianship proceedings, a family member who ended up in a care facility they never chose. Then he told me about the cake. Diane had asked Craig's mother's friend, a woman who runs a small catering business, to make Lily's birthday cake. Standard enough, but Nolan had overheard them on the phone that morning. And Diane had said something about wanting the cake to be extra special, and then she'd laughed in a way that made Nolan's stomach drop. He didn't know what was in it. He just knew something wasn't right. I sat with all of this for a long moment after he stopped talking. Then I said, "Nolan, you did the right thing. Don't say anything to anyone. Can you do that?" He said he could. He sounded relieved, and also still scared. I told him I loved him. I hung up the phone. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Gerald had his last cup of coffee, and I let myself feel everything for about 10 minutes. The hurt of it. The specific searing pain of knowing that your own child looked at you and saw a problem to be solved. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. His name is Robert Casson. He's been my attorney for 22 years, since Gerald and I updated our wills after the kids were grown. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Vivian, I need you to listen to me carefully. Don't confront Diane or Craig. Don't let them know you're aware of anything. And come into the office this week." I came in on Wednesday. Robert explained what guardianship and conservatorship proceedings actually look like, how a family member can petition a court to have an elderly person declared legally incapacitated, which strips that person of the right to make their own financial and medical decisions. He said it's more common than people think, and that the cases that succeed often involve a compliant medical professional who provides documentation the court relies on heavily. He asked me what I knew about Dr. Harlan Weeks. I told him what Nolan had told me. Robert made a note. He told me he had a colleague who could look into the doctor's record, whether there had been complaints, whether his name appeared in any guardianship cases in the county over the past several years. Then he said, "We're going to get you evaluated properly by a neuropsychologist with no connection to your family. We're going to establish a documented baseline of your cognitive function, and then we're going to have that on record before anything else happens." I asked him how much time we had. He said he didn't know, but that I should assume Diane and Craig were already moving. I drove home from that meeting and called my doctor, my regular doctor, Patricia Wynne, who has been my physician for 11 years and who knows me better than most people. I explained the situation. She was furious on my behalf. She gave me a referral to a neuropsychologist at Mission Hospital within the week. Her name was Dr. Sandra Okafor. She spent 3 hours with me over 2 appointments. Tests, conversations, memory exercises, problem solving. At the end of our second session, she told me I scored in the above-average range for my age group across all measures. She put that in writing. I held that report and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Solid ground. In the meantime, Robert's colleague had been looking into Dr. Harlan Weeks. What they found was not criminal, but it was a pattern. Over the past 6 years, Dr. Weeks had conducted capacity evaluations in at least 9 cases that led to guardianship petitions in Buncombe County. In 7 of those cases, the elderly patient was moved into a care facility within 12 months of the evaluation. In 5 of those cases, the family's primary asset, usually a home, was sold within 2 years of guardianship being granted. None of it was proof of wrongdoing on its own, but together it told a story. Robert also discovered that Craig had scheduled an appointment for me with Dr. Weeks. He'd done it using my name, through a form on the practice's website, and had listed himself as my emergency contact. I had never been asked. I had never consented. The appointment was scheduled for the 2nd Tuesday in November. I did not cancel it. I did not call the office. I left it exactly where it was. Instead, I called my sister Dorothy, who lives in Knoxville. I told her everything. Dorothy is 72, and she spent 40 years as a paralegal, and she does not panic. She said, "Tell me what you need." What I needed was a witness, someone who could be with me, going through my own files, making sure nothing was overlooked. Dorothy drove up the following weekend and we went through everything. Financial records, the deed to the house, Gerald's pension documents, my retirement accounts. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. I made copies of all of it. Robert kept 1 set. I sent another set to Dorothy. I put a 3rd set in a safety deposit box at the bank downtown. I also called a locksmith and had every lock in the house rekeyed. I kept seeing Diane. I kept coming to Sunday dinners. I kept being the grandmother who shows up with butterscotch candies in her pocket and lets Lily try on earrings and asks Nolan about his soccer season. I kept smiling. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder than I expected, and I had expected it to be hard. The Sunday dinners were 3 hours each. Diane would hug me at the door. Craig would pour me a glass of iced tea. We would all sit at that table and talk about nothing. The weather, Lily's school project, whether Hendersonville was getting a new Publix. And the whole time I would be looking at my daughter and thinking, "You scheduled a doctor's appointment in my name. You did this and you are sitting here hugging me." Nolan was the hardest part. He couldn't meet my eyes across the table. He was carrying too much for a 15-year-old, and I couldn't take it from him yet. And that broke my heart more than anything his parents had done. One Sunday, after dinner, I found him in the hallway near the coat closet, pretending to look at his phone. I walked past him and quietly said, "You're doing great, almost done." He didn't look up, but he gave the smallest nod. That nod kept me going for 2 more weeks. The 2nd Tuesday in November came. I arrived at Dr. Weeks's office at the scheduled time. He was a pleasant-looking man in his mid-60s, with a very tidy desk and a way of tilting his head when he listened that probably seemed attentive and probably wasn't. He told me it was a routine cognitive assessment. He said my family had expressed some concerns. He handed me the first test. I completed every section. I answered every question. Near the end of our time together, he set down his pen and said, in the careful tone of someone delivering a verdict, "We'll have results within 2 weeks." I smiled. I shook his hand. I thanked him for his time. What Dr. Haar Weeks didn't know was that Robert had sent a letter to his office the previous morning, certified mail, return receipt, notifying him that I had independent legal representation, that I had already completed a full neuropsychological evaluation at Mission Hospital with documented results, and that I had not consented to any evaluation conducted on behalf of a third party. The letter also noted that any documentation produced by his office would be subject to review in the event of legal proceedings. Robert told me later that the letter had been signed for by a front desk receptionist at 9:14 that morning. My appointment had been at 10. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I was at my kitchen table grading. Old habit. I volunteer 2 mornings a week helping with adult literacy at the community centre. When Robert called, he said, "Vivian, Craig filed a petition." I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. And still, hearing it said out loud in Robert's careful, even voice, my hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles hurt. Craig had filed a petition for limited conservatorship over my financial affairs in Buncombe County Superior Court. He had submitted Dr. Towell. Weeks' evaluation is supporting documentation. The evaluation, Robert told me, cited possible early indicators of executive function difficulty and recommended further assessment. I thought about the 3 hours I had spent with Dr. Sandra Okafor, above average across all measures. "What do we do?" I asked. "We answer," Robert said, "and we bring everything." The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in December at the Buncombe County Courthouse. I spent the 2 weeks before it the way I spent most of my working life, preparing. Robert had retained Dr. Cullis, Okafor as an expert witness. He had subpoenaed the records from Dr. Weeks's office and had identified 3 prior patients willing to provide affidavits about their own experiences with similar evaluations. He had also formally requested documentation of how Craig came to schedule the appointment using my name without my knowledge or consent, which, Robert explained, may itself constitute a legal issue. My sister Dorothy drove back up from Knoxville and stayed with me. We made soup and watched old movies and went to bed early and tried to act like everything was ordinary, which it wasn't, but trying helped. Nolan texted me the night before the hearing. He used his own phone this time. "Grandma, you're the strongest person I know. I mean that." I sat in my bedroom and cried for about 4 minutes, and then I washed my face and went to bed. I wore my good grey wool coat and my pearl earrings. Gerald gave me those pearls on our 25th anniversary. I have worn them for every important moment since. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Diane and Craig came in together. Diane did not look at me directly. Craig looked at me once and then looked away. They had their own attorney, a man named Philip Garrett, who apparently specializes in elder law and had a very confident way of arranging his papers. Mr. Garrett presented their case first. He submitted Dr. Weeks's evaluation. He talked about my age, about the house, about what he called the complexity of managing significant assets independently. He used the word concern many times. He spoke about my welfare with great warmth, while asking the court to hand control of my finances to my son-in-law. Then Robert presented our response. Dr. Okafor took the stand. She explained her methodology, her findings, and her conclusions. She answered questions for 40 minutes in the clearest, most precise language I had ever heard a person use. She said under oath that based on every measure available to her, I demonstrated full cognitive capacity appropriate to my age and background. Robert then submitted the documentation on Dr. Weeks. the pattern of evaluations, the subsequent guardianship filings, the outcomes for the patients involved. He submitted the affidavits. He submitted the certified mail receipt from Dr. Weeks's office, time-stamped 9:14 a.m. on the morning of my appointment. He submitted proof that Craig had scheduled the appointment using my name and personal information without my knowledge or authorization. The judge was a woman named the Honourable Patricia McLean. She had a way of listening that reminded me of my best students, fully present, noting everything, giving nothing away. She asked Mr. Garrett several questions about the scheduling of Dr. Weeks' appointment. Mr. Garrett said that Craig had acted out of concern for my well-being and had simply been trying to facilitate care. Judge McLean asked whether I had been informed of the appointment in advance. Mr. Garrett said he believed the family had planned to discuss it with me. Judge McLean looked at me then for the first time directly, and I held her gaze. She denied the petition. She also issued a written statement noting concerns about the manner in which the evaluation had been arranged and the pattern of manner in which the evaluation had been arranged. Weeks documented cases and referred both matters to the State Medical Board for review. Craig and Diane left without speaking to me. Robert shook my hand in the hallway. Dorothy hugged me so hard, one of my pearl earrings came loose, and we had to find it on the courthouse floor. I drove home in silence. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at Gerald's kitchen table and stayed there for a long time, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting in my house. My paid-off, ridiculous, $580,000 house that I bought with my husband and raised my children in, and where I plan to stay until I'm good and ready to go somewhere else, if I ever am. In January, I established a new formal estate plan with Robert, a revocable living trust, a durable power of attorney designating Dorothy, and advanced healthcare directors with Dorothy and my physician as decision-makers. Everything is documented. Everything is current. If anyone ever tries to bring a guardianship petition against me again, they will walk into a wall of paperwork. I also set up a college savings account for Nolan. I told him it was because he was going to need it, and because he'd earned it, and because he'd earned it, and because I could. He cried. He's 15. He tried to act like he didn't. I haven't spoken to Diane since December. I don't know if I will. There is a particular grief in that, different from losing Gerald, different from any loss I have known before. My daughter sat across from me at her kitchen table for months and smiled at me while planning to take my autonomy away. I don't know how you come back from that. I don't know if you try. What I know is this. I am 68 years old. I taught English to 12-year-olds for 3 decades, and I can still diagram a sentence faster than most people half my age. I do the crossword in pen. I drive myself to the grocery store. I manage my own checkbook and my own life and my own home, and I will keep doing so for as long as I am able, and when I am no longer able, I will be the one who decides what comes next. No one gets to make that decision for me, not while I'm sitting here with my tea at my table in my house. Lily still calls me on weekends. She told me last month that she'd started learning to knit, and she wants me to teach her how to do the cable stitch. I told her to come over Saturday. She came. We sat on the couch with yarn and needles for 3 hours, and she talked the whole time about her friends and her teacher and a book she was reading, and I helped her untangle the yarn when it knotted, and we laughed when it went wrong, and it was the best afternoon I'd had in a long time. Nolan came too. He sat in Gerald's armchair and pretended to do homework and mostly just watched us, and every so often he'd look up and catch my eye, and we wouldn't say anything because we didn't need to. That was enough. That was more than enough. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry. If I wake up in the morning and feel it sitting on my chest, the betrayal, the loss of the daughter I thought I knew. Honestly, the answer changes depending on the day. Some mornings I'm fine. Some mornings I pour my coffee and stand at the kitchen window and the anger is right there, quiet and cold, like a stone I keep finding in my pocket. But here's what I've come to understand. After all of it, the choices Diane and Craig made were not made in a single moment. They were built slowly, over years, out of a particular way of seeing the world, one where an elderly woman alone in a paid-off house is a resource, not a person. That worldview didn't appear overnight, and neither did the consequences of it. What they didn't count on was Nolan, a 15-year-old boy who was uncomfortable enough with what he overheard that he couldn't sleep, who looked things up on his own because he needed to understand, who borrowed an old phone so he could warn me without being caught. Nobody taught him to do that in a classroom. That kind of moral instinct comes from something deeper, from paying attention, from caring, from the simple decision to act on what you know is right even when it costs you something. In his case, it cost him 2 months of sitting at that Sunday dinner table, knowing what he knew, watching his parents, watching me, saying nothing out loud. That is not a small thing to ask of anyone, let alone a kid. I think about that a lot, about what it actually takes to do the right thing when doing the right thing is inconvenient and frightening and could make your life harder. Most people, when tested that way, find some reason not to act. They tell themselves it isn't their place, or they're not sure enough, or someone else will handle it. Nolan didn't do that. He sat with the discomfort and he acted anyway. That's not luck. That's character. And I think about my own role in it. Not with guilt. I've made my peace with that, but with honesty. I spent months explaining away the signs because it was easier than accepting what they meant. That instinct to protect a version of your family you want to believe in is deeply human, but it can also leave you exposed. What protected me, ultimately, was not innocence. It was preparation. It was Robert Casson and Dr. Okafor and Dorothy driving up from Knoxville with her reading glasses and her 40 years of paralegal knowledge and her complete unwillingness to panic. It was the safety deposit box and the rekeyed locks and the documented paper trail that made the truth undeniable. You cannot always control what people decide to do to you, but you can control whether you've done the work to be ready when it happens. That readiness, building it quietly before you need it, is one of the most important things I know now that I didn't fully understand before. I'm 68. I still have things to learn. I imagine I always will. What I know for certain is this: the people in your life will show you eventually exactly who they are. The question is whether you're paying attention when they do. I wasn't for longer than I should have been, but when Nolan handed me the truth, I held on to it. I didn't flinch and I didn't look away, and I built something solid out of it. That's all any of us can do. Pay attention, prepare, and when the moment comes, hold on.